Okay, so who is he? He is Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote the Book of Five Rings, which is essentially a book that is simultaneously about warfare but also about life. And a lot of you have asked us to do this, especially I think JJHW has asked us to do this many times. I think it's time to do it.
Yeah, it's one of the books I actually haven't read because I was under the understanding it was mostly just a sword manual and there wasn't that much philosophy to it. And then you said to me, well, there is actually philosophical components to it, and then I was all over it, and I'm fresh off of the press from reading it. And so it's all in my mind, and I really enjoyed it actually, just as a general sort of impression of the book. I thought it was great. You know, if you're interested in furthering your abilities of your mind and the blade, then it's for you. And I, for one, am all for all of those things.
Great. So basically, I want to say something that we're not going to do a book review because a lot of the book is concerned with movements and how to dodge the opponent and how to fight and how to hold a sword and how to do all these things. By the way, we do have a sword there.
Yeah, I can show you if you want.
Yes. Okay. So we're not going to do a book review. We're not going to teach you how to wield a sword, but we are going to talk about the insights we can draw from Musashi's Book of Five Rings and the wisdom we can draw from it when it comes to improving yourselves.
Yeah, and there's a lot of philosophy in the book, isn't there? And
yes,
even the stuff that is a demonstration about how you should approach sword fighting is, and he explicitly says so, an analogy to other walks of life. And I think we're going to get into this in greater detail. But the whole book is almost laden with analogy to other things. It tries to tease out universals of human mastery, I think, is one of the themes that the book tackles, and saying that, you know, a master artisan is similar to a master of the blade, in that they both approach their arts with similar philosophies.
yes,
And he's trying to tease out the similarities. So it's actually quite a good book to approach if you're looking to understand the philosophy of combat and things like that.
Let me ask you this, because I have heard that you're an Eastern philosophy aficionado.
Strong word, but sure.
Okay, so would you say that Eastern philosophy is really based on metaphor, or to a significant extent, that when people write in that tradition, they very frequently use metaphors to illustrate what they want to say? So I think in this book, for instance, there's the word emptiness plays a really heavy role.
Yes. I think
that sounds like a metaphor.
Yes. And there certainly are lots of metaphors, but I would pose it as also a part of the language difference between East and West. So, you know, when we covered the Tao Te Ching, we were talking about how the traditional Chinese characters would be laden with meaning that gets lost to a certain extent because it's a symbol that could mean multiple different things. It relates to lots of different concepts and in specific ways that get lost in translation. And I think that part of the reason we see lots of Eastern philosophy is very metaphorical is that that's kind of what their language encourages, because you have this symbol that represents concepts. That's how their language works. Whereas our language, you know, you have it make up words which make a sound which represents a concept, and so it's not as direct. And I think that there's a lot of poetry contained in that approach to language that you don't really get in Western style languages, and so that helps encourage analogy, because you can have clever wordplay and things like that. You have a certain symbol that represents something, but also it has lots of other connotations which the native reader would understand, but when it's translated into English, to try and capture that kind of meaning, you have to use lots of different linguistic devices, and sometimes a little bit of it gets lost in translation, which is a shame. It's one of those things that you kind of have to understand the language to fully grasp what they're trying to get at. But there's still a lot there.
Yes. So I think we should let the audience know of a structure that we could follow in order to discuss this, because it's easy to get lost. It's such a rich text that...
It's also not very long, which is...
Yes, but that is deceptive. Would you not say so?
Yeah, I caught myself reading a line and then just sitting and thinking about it. So it might be short in terms of the written words on the page, but if you approach it properly with, due reverence and seriousness, you will find yourself sitting and thinking on what they're saying. I found myself kind of staring into space, imagining what it would be like to have to train with a sword every day, because unfortunately I don't do that. But yeah, I think it's quite evocative. There's lots of thought-provoking passages there, and if you take your time with it and read stuff and think about it, because there's actually lots of prompts in there where he says you should reflect on this.
Yes, that was really nice.
Yeah, it's good to have that emphasis, because it's implicit a lot of the time in Western philosophy. You don't explicitly say, you should think about this.
Yes.
Or you should meditate on this, because not only does it sound a bit arrogant in a Western sense, in that, it's not that common to say that, so you're making out as if what you're saying is a bit more profound than it may well be. But in the East, you've got more of a tradition of meditation. Of course, he references Buddhism explicitly a few times.
Yes.
Then it makes a lot more sense. It would be presumed that you meditate, and it's just giving suggestions. Oh, this is useful to meditate on. It's already part of your regime. It's not like you're telling someone to sit still and think about what you said. So there's a much different connotation. But I found myself taking to doing it anyway. I didn't really need to be prompted.
Yes.
But I suppose it depends on who you are and how prone you are to do that. I do that in lots of books. Why it takes me a long time to read a book is that I like to indulge my thoughts as they come up, rather than just sit there and feel like I've just got to slog through it without actually taking time to think about what's being said and incorporating it into my own pre-existing notions of the world. And I think you do get a lot more out of the latter.
Yes, I agree with you. And there are several people, they just skim or read something, they speed read it, and they just say, okay, yeah, I read this or that and the other, but you don't see them absorbing the insights of those books. So, okay, you read the language on the pages of that book, but you didn't absorb its message.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of my favourite things about Eastern philosophy as well, is that it's short and sweet. They don't waste your time. It's meant to be concise, almost refined wisdom, I would say. Like, he's writing at the age of 60 years old, as he says, and he's trying to summarise his experiences in as much of a condensed way as possible. He does a quite good job of it, really. And even though I've not had 60 years of being a swordsman, I could certainly understand where he was coming from, even though, I'm 28 and living in England rather than 60 and living in feudal Japan. So there's something to be said about how effectively he's communicated as well, which you wouldn't expect really from someone who has spent all of his time sword fighting and dueling and things like that.
So I think we should say a bit about his biography. We don't know much about him, but we know a few important things. Then talk a bit about the samurai, because he was a masterless samurai. Then talk about the story of the 47 Ronin, because it shows it is considered to be one of the ultimate expression of Bushido. That was the way of the warrior that the samurai were really known for, and see the kind of culture that bred him and the kind of cultural influences that he had in order to develop his own perspective. And then we could focus on the insights drawn from the book that are unbelievably pertinent to self-mastery.
They certainly are. Well, I think the book is all about self-mastery, really.
Yeah.
It may be focused on the sword, but there's a lot of lessons to be learnt elsewhere. I think that one of the things that I like about someone who's mastered, we never really master anything, do we? But they're some of the best in the world, is that their reverence for their craft and the lessons that they have refined over the years are a lot more universal. They're not specific. Like you speak to, you know, a master fisherman or a master woodworker or any number of professions, and they will have life lessons embedded in their own experience. And I think experience should be the gold standard of all knowledge, really. I think that it is all well and good to have abstract arguments, but at this, you know, you've got real life experience to back it up. You know that at least that's grounded somewhat in reality. Sure, there's some amount of subjectivity in how it's interpreted, but say if you're a swordsman, if you're 60 years old, you've made it to that age after all the fighting that he's done, then him being alive and writing the book in the first place is a testament to his skill, I would say.
Yes, and we will definitely go back to that theme, because I think that it's one of the most important themes of the book, where experience and thought can merge and when they can diverge.
Yes.
Okay, so let us say one thing, that he was born around 1584 and died around 1645, a few months after he finished this book. And he was essentially a masterless samurai, as we said, a samurai without a master. We will talk in a bit about who the samurai were. And he was in the Edo period. And the Edo period begins in the very beginning of the 17th century and ends with, I think, with a major restoration, close to 1868, somewhere there. And it was a period that was a period of transition. And up to that point, the samurai were much more prevalent in Japanese society, but there was a shogun, there was a sort of military leader, I think called Tokugawa, who implemented several policies that brought peace to Japan. So that meant that the elite class of warriors, who were the samurai, had to seek alternative employment. Because when you're a professional warrior and there aren't any wars, you need to seek alternative employment. So that was a period where the samurai started trying to do other stuff, and they started taking other trades. And you could say that a lot of the major texts, when it came to that tradition, came from that period because they had more time to sit down and read and write. So what is interesting with him is that he starts the book by saying that I'm now close to 60 years old and I am going to my cave with a candlelight, and I'm going to sit down, write my story, and talk to you about the way of the sword. And essentially he says that he is an undefeated duelist. He was an expert at sword fighting. He killed his first opponent when he was 13, and the last opponent when he was 29. He fought a lot in such duels. He traveled a lot, but then I think they say that he sort of left that behind and sought a more peaceful way of living. I think some people have said that he was a gardener at some point, and he became a teacher. Anyway, he wanted to impart that knowledge, and he said that he was practicing daily the art of the sword. And at some point he came to the realization when he was 50 years old, and that's a really important thing, that his greatness at sword fighting wasn't so much a greatness that had to do with him amassing and mastering each martial art, but the idea that he grasped something deeper. And that's a major issue that he's talking about. That's a major theme, because he is focused very much on simplicity rather than multiplicity. So he's much more focused on substance than all the various kicks and martial arts. And that reminds me of the I think the Bruce Lee line that I don't fear the person who has performed 10,000 kicks once, I fear the person who has performed one kick 10,000 times.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.